In the world of stand-up comedy, there are legends who are celebrated, and then there are the ones who are revered, the ones the other comics would stop what they were doing to go and watch. Richard Jeni was that guy. He was a comedian's comedian, a master craftsman of the joke, a high-energy intellectual tornado of wit who could dissect the absurdities of modern life with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a philosopher. For those who remember him, his name conjures a very specific image, a sharp suit, a restless energy, and a mind that moved at 1,000 miles an hour. He was a fixture on late-night television, a star of multiple HBO specials, and a voice that was both hilariously cynical and deeply relatable. He was on top of the world. And then, one sunny Saturday morning in 2007, the laughter stopped. The news that Richard Jeni had died and the shocking circumstances surrounding his death sent a wave of confusion and grief through the comedy world and beyond. How could a man who brought so much joy to so many be in such a dark place? The story of Richard Jeni is more than just a biography of a brilliant comedian. It's a complex, often heartbreaking look at the profound divide between the person on stage and the person in the mirror. It's a story about relentless ambition, the crushing weight of perfectionism, and the silent battle that one of comedy's brightest minds fought when the lights went down and he was all alone. To understand Richard Jeni, you have to understand where he came from. He was born Richard John Colangelo on April 14th, 1957, in the Bensonhurst neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. In the mid-20th century, Bensonhurst was a vibrant, tough, and tightly knit Italian-American enclave. It was a world of stickball games in the street, Sunday dinners with the extended family, and a specific brand of street-smart observational humor that was a part of the air you breathed. This wasn't a place that produced sensitive, introspective artists in the traditional sense. It was a place that valued toughness, quick wits, and the ability to hold your own. Laughter was a currency, a defense mechanism, and a way of life. You learned to be funny as a matter of survival. It was in this environment that Richard's worldview was forged. He was an observer from a young age, soaking in the characters, the rhythms of speech, and the everyday dramas of his neighborhood. He wasn't the class clown, however. That would be too simple. By all accounts, he was a quiet, intensely bright kid. His intelligence was palpable. His father was a bookkeeper, his mother a homemaker, and they instilled in him a strong work ethic and a respect for education. They were a working-class family with aspirations for their children to achieve a level of white-collar success that had been out of their own reach. The path seemed clear. Get good grades, go to college, get a respectable job. Richard followed that path. He graduated from high school and enrolled at Hunter College in Manhattan, where he earned a bachelor's degree with honors in political science. He was on the fast track to a career in law or marketing. He was doing everything he was supposed to do, but a different calling was simmering just beneath the surface. The comedy boom of the 1980s was exploding. Clubs like Catch a Rising Star and the Improv were the epicenters of a cultural movement. Comedians like George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and a new generation, led by Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno, were becoming the new rock stars. For an intellectual kid from Brooklyn with a razor-sharp wit, the pull of that world was irresistible. The stage offered something a corporate boardroom never could, a place to analyze the world, deconstruct it, and present his findings to a captive audience. After a brief stint in a marketing job, he made the terrifying leap. Richard Colangelo, the political science major, decided to become Richard Jeni, the stand-up comedian. The life of an aspiring comedian in New York City in the early 1980s was a brutal, unforgiving grind. Let's be clear, this wasn't the polished Netflix special world of comedy we know today. This was a gritty, street-level hustle. It was a world of dimly lit clubs that smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke, where the clinking of glasses and the disinterested chatter of the audience was a constant soundtrack you had to fight against. It was a world of hecklers, emboldened by a couple of drinks, who saw you as their personal entertainment target. And it was a world defined by the constant, soul-crushing possibility of bombing, of standing alone under a single hot light, telling your most precious jokes to a wall of utter silence. Richard Jeni threw himself into this crucible with an almost frightening level of determination. He spent his nights hopping from club to club in his beat-up car, begging for a few minutes of stage time at 3 a.m, performing for a handful of insomniacs and other comics. His days weren't for rest, they were for work. He would be at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, writing, rewriting, and endlessly polishing his material. He was a man possessed by a mission, unlike many of his peers who relied on a quirky persona, a memorable catchphrase, or just raw, chaotic charm. Jeni's act was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated writing. His jokes were meticulously crafted, his arguments logical, his premises flawlessly constructed. He wasn't just telling jokes, he was building them from the ground up, piece by piece, ensuring every single word served a purpose. He was a comedic architect. His idol and biggest influence was the legendary George Carlin, another intellectual giant who used comedy as a tool to dissect language, hypocrisy, and the failings of society. Jeni didn't just want to be funny like Carlin. He aspired to that same level of intellectual brilliance, and he was willing to put in the grueling, solitary work to achieve it. Slowly, meticulously, he started to get noticed. His reputation grew on the circuit. He wasn't just another comic telling jokes about his girlfriend or the subway. He was an original voice, a thinker, a guy whose act had a thesis. Then came the break that every single comedian of that era dreamed of, the phone call that could change everything. A spot on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. In the 80s, getting on Carson was the ultimate seal of approval. It was the comedy world's equivalent of being knighted. A good set could literally change your life overnight. Your booking fee would triple, clubs from all over the country would be calling, and you'd earn the lifelong respect of your peers. Jeni didn't just have a good set, he had a great one. He walked out onto that hallowed stage with the confidence of a seasoned pro and delivered a tight killer 5 minutes. Carson, the undisputed king of late night, loved him. Johnny was known for his discerning taste, and he saw in Jeni a kindred spirit, a comedian with a sharp, intelligent, and slightly cynical view of the world that mirrored his own. Jeni became a regular on the show, and that exposure catapulted him from a respected club comic into the national spotlight. With his star on the rise, he caught the eye of HBO. In the 90s, a 1-hour HBO comedy special was the absolute pinnacle of the stand-up world. It was a comedian's magnum opus, a chance to present your definitive, unfiltered vision to a massive audience. Jeni would go on to star in 3 of them, each one a comedic masterpiece that captured a different stage of his evolution. The first was 1992's Richard Jeni, Platypus Man. The title itself was classic Jeni, a weird, memorable, and slightly absurd concept that he brilliantly spun into a metaphor for the modern confused male. In it, he wasn't just telling jokes, he was exploring the anxieties of a generation of men who were caught between the traditional roles of the past and the changing expectations of the present. The special was a massive hit, earning him a Cable Ace Award for Best Stand-Up Comedy Special and cementing his status as an A-list comedian. The success of Platypus Man was so significant that it led to a network sitcom of the same name on UPN in 1995. This was the holy grail for comics in the 90s, following the path of Seinfeld and Tim Allen. While the show was short-lived, perhaps because Jeni's brand of intellectual cynicism was a tough fit for the formulaic sitcom world, it, along with his memorable role as Jim Carrey's goofy best friend, Charlie, in the 1994 blockbuster The Mask, made his face instantly recognizable to millions. He was no longer just a stand-up comedian working in smoky clubs. He was a bona fide celebrity. He followed up his HBO success with A Good Catholic Boy in 1997 and A Big Steaming Pile of Me in 2005. Each special showcased his evolution as an artist. His comedy was always observational, but it became sharper, more personal, and more willing to tackle big philosophical questions about relationships, religion, and the meaning of life. In A Good Catholic Boy, he brilliantly mined his own upbringing, deconstructing the guilt and absurdity of his religious education with a surgeon's precision. In his final special, the provocatively titled A Big Steaming Pile of Me, the comedy was at its most raw and personal. It was the work of a man taking a hard look at himself and the bizarre state of the world around him. He had a unique, almost magical ability to be both incredibly smart and incredibly silly. One minute he'd be deconstructing the logistical absurdities of the Old Testament with the precision of a biblical scholar, and the next he'd be on the floor, doing a flawless, convulsive impression of a squirrel trying to cross a busy street. It was this incredible range, this fusion of the highbrow and the lowbrow, that set him apart. He was at the absolute peak of his powers, a master of his craft, universally respected by his peers and beloved by his fans. From the outside, Richard Jeni had it all. To his peers, Richard Jeni wasn't just a successful comedian. He was the gold standard. He was universally known as a comedian's comedian, a term of the highest respect reserved for those who are admired not just by the public, but by the other comics who truly understand the grueling, intricate craft of making people laugh. Jerry Seinfeld, himself a legendary technician of the joke, flatly called him a brilliant comedian and a good friend. Chris Rock, a comedic force of nature, upon hearing of his death, simply and powerfully said Richard Jeni was one of the best. These weren't hollow platitudes. They were acknowledgments of his mastery from the very best in the business. Bill Maher, a close friend who shared Jeni's cynical and political edge, often spoke of his incredible, almost obsessive work ethic. He wasn't a guy who just riffed on stage hoping to find the funny. He was a writer, first and foremost. He would spend months, even years, crafting a single hour of material until every word, every pause, every inflection was perfect. He would fill legal pads with notes, diagramming his bits, mapping out the rhythm and flow of his act like a composer writing a symphony. He was a perfectionist in a profession that is often messy and improvisational. This dedication earned him the deep respect of his own idol, George Carlin, who considered Jeni one of the few true craftsmen in the business. In the cutthroat world of stand-up, where egos are large and jealousy is rampant, Jeni commanded a unique level of reverence. When he was scheduled to perform at a legendary club like the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, the Green Room, normally a loud, boisterous hub of comics, would empty out. Performers would file into the back of the main room, standing silently in the shadows, not just to laugh, but to study. They were watching a master at work, trying to figure out how he made it look so effortless. They were there to see the comedian that all of them, in their heart of hearts, wish they could be. But the man off stage was a stark contrast to his confident, talkative public persona. He was intensely private, almost reclusive. He had a long-term, loving relationship with his girlfriend, Amy Murphy, a television weather anchor and actress. They shared a home in the Hollywood Hills, but he kept his personal life fiercely guarded. He didn't do the party scene. He didn't crave the spotlight outside of his work. His life was his work, his relationship, and a very small circle of trusted friends. Behind the scenes, a darker reality was taking hold. For years, Richard Jeni had been battling a silent, insidious disease, severe clinical depression. This wasn't just a case of feeling sad or being moody. This was a debilitating chronic illness that fundamentally altered the chemistry of his brain. In the months leading up to his death, his condition had worsened dramatically. He was diagnosed with paranoid psychosis, a severe mental state where the sufferer loses touch with reality, experiencing intense paranoia and delusions. His family and his girlfriend Amy were his small support system, trying desperately to help him navigate this terrifying internal landscape. He was seeing a psychiatrist, he was on medication, but the illness was relentless. His sister Mary later gave a heartbreakingly clear description of his state of mind. She said, "He wasn't Richard anymore. His brain was misfiring. He was convinced that people were following him, that he was being watched. The same brilliant, analytical mind that could deconstruct a social custom for a joke was now deconstructing reality itself and reassembling it into a terrifying, paranoid fantasy." He kept this struggle almost entirely hidden from the outside world. To his friends in the comedy community, he might have seemed a bit withdrawn, but no one knew the true depth of his suffering. The stigma around mental illness in the early 2000s, especially for a successful man in a tough business, was immense. Admitting to that kind of vulnerability would have been seen as a career-ending weakness. So, he suffered in silence, showing the world the face of the confident, hilarious Richard Jeni, while the man inside was slowly being consumed by his illness. The day before he died, he was sitting with Amy, watching a basketball game, when he turned to her and said with a chilling calmness, "Just give me the gun." The battle was reaching its endgame. The death of Richard Jeni brings into sharp focus one of the most painful and persistent debates surrounding comedy, the trope of the sad clown. Is there an intrinsic link between comedy and pain? Does genius require suffering? Jeni's story is a tragic and often misunderstood exhibit in this ongoing conversation. On one hand, it's easy to romanticize the idea that his incredible insight into the human condition was born from his own private torment. It's a compelling narrative. The man who made others laugh because he himself was crying on the inside. But this interpretation, while poetic, does a great disservice to both his talent and the devastating reality of his illness. Richard Jeni's comedy came from his intelligence, his discipline, and his relentless hard work. He was a genius because he had a brilliant mind and he spent thousands of hours honing his craft. His depression was not the source of his genius. It was a destructive disease that ultimately silenced it. The real debate his story ignites is about the profound stigma of mental illness. In the days immediately following his death, before his family released a statement, the narrative was shaped by speculation. The media, and even some in the public, portrayed his suicide as a selfish or cowardly act, the choice of a man who was simply unhappy. This is where the historical context is so crucial. In 2007, the public conversation about mental health was nowhere near as open as it is today. For a man like Richard Jeni, whose entire career was built on being in control, on being the smartest guy in the room, admitting to an illness that scrambled his thoughts and made him feel powerless, would have been unthinkable. His family's decision to speak out was incredibly brave and historically significant. They made it unequivocally clear that Richard did not die by suicide, Because of a bad career move or a broken heart, he died from a catastrophic mental illness. His sister stated, "The hope is that the focus will be on the illness that took his life and not on the act." This shifted the narrative. It forced a more nuanced and compassionate conversation. It was a powerful public statement that suicide is often the final tragic symptom of an untreated or treatment-resistant disease, not a moral failing. The controversy, then, is not about Richard Jeni himself, but about how we as a society understand the brain. We have empathy for a person who dies from cancer or heart disease, but there remains a lingering, subtle judgment for those who die from a disease of the mind. Richard Jeni's story remains a powerful, heartbreaking argument against that prejudice. It challenges us to see mental illness not as a character flaw, but as the legitimate, life-threatening medical condition that it is. The debate is about whether we can finally separate the artist from the illness and honor the brilliance of his work while mourning the tragedy of the disease that took his life. Richard Jeni's death sent a shockwave through the comedy world, serving as a stark wake-up call that shattered the illusion of invincibility many comedians project. His passing forced a much-needed conversation about mental health and vulnerability within the often isolating and competitive stand-up community, making the unspoken struggles of many more visible. As a comedian, Jeni's historical significance is secure. He is regarded as a master of the form, a pivotal figure who bridged the gap between the observational humor of Seinfeld and the intellectual deconstruction of Carlin. His work endures because it focused on the timeless absurdities of human behavior, ensuring its relevance long after topical jokes have faded. However, Jeni's most profound and lasting legacy is the one his family championed in the wake of his tragedy: a greater public understanding of mental illness. By insisting that the narrative focus on his disease, they helped combat the dangerous stigma surrounding suicide and educated the public that even the most brilliant and successful individuals are not immune. The story of Richard Jeni is a tragic paradox. He possessed an extraordinary mind that could perceive the world with unique clarity and use that gift to bring immense joy to millions. Yet that same brilliant mind was afflicted by an illness that ultimately destroyed him. His life serves as a powerful cautionary tale about the illusion of success and a poignant reminder that we must look beyond the surface with greater empathy. His legacy is therefore twofold: the genius of his comedy that continues to make us laugh, and the lesson of his life that implores us to be kinder and more aware of the silent battles fought all around us.